You're walking through a town square one day. You take an apple. You have your young son with you. You place the apple on top of your young son's head, and you take your crossbow, aim carefully, and shoot an arrow to shoot that apple off of your son's head. Why? What would prompt you to do this? Let's take a look. William Tell, The Story and the Stamps. The legend from Switzerland about William Tell states that William Tell, a marksman with the crossbow, an expert, as everyone said during the time, had a little incident that prompted him to do what most of us know of the story, where he shot an apple off his son's head with an arrow. Well, during this time, and this was in the 14th century, the very early 14th century, some stories have it about the year 1307 on November 18th. And during that time, the Habsburg emperors of Austria were seeking to dominate the canton of Uri, and cantons were the various areas of Switzerland at the time before they became a federation of cantons and grew quite a bit. Well, a man named Albrecht Gessler was the newly appointed Austrian sort of a government representative, sometimes referred to as a bailiff. And what this man did from Austria is he came onto the canton of Uri, and in the town square, he erected a pole, and he took his hat off and placed his hat on top of the pole. And then he passed a law stating that all citizens who passed that pole with his hat on top must bow down before it. Well, there was a man who was visiting, William Tell. He had his young son with him, and William Tell was a very proud Swiss. And as he passed that pole with the hat on top, William Tell did not bow down. He was thereby arrested, and as punishment, he had a choice. Either he could shoot an apple off the head of his son by the name of Walter, or they would both be executed. William Tell was promised freedom if he successfully made the shot. Well, William Tell took careful aim and shot the arrow and split the apple off his son's head, who must have been a very scared but a very brave young boy, and was successful in this challenge put forth by the Austrian bailiff. But then the Austrian bailiff had a question. Albrecht Gessler had noticed that before the shot, William Tell had removed 2 crossbow bolts from his quiver, not one. So after the shot, Gessler asked him why he removed 2 crossbow bolts. Well, William Tell replied that if he had killed his son, he would have turned the crossbow on Gessler himself and killed him with the second arrow. Well, Gessler was very angry, of course, had Tell arrested again, bound, and brought to his ship, which was scheduled to be taken to go to the castle back in Austria. Well, Gessler thought this was going to be fine at that point and made his way to the ship so he could go back to Küsnacht in Austria to his castle, where he thought William Tell would then be imprisoned for life. The story isn't clear. There's no mention of what happened to his William Tell's son at this point. So it's one of the mysteries of the story. But as William Tell was brought on board the ship, it's kind of interesting because there was a storm on the ship apparently, and the crew was very afraid and maybe not very skilled. So some of the prisoners that were bound and their hands tied on the ship were let loose so they could help sail the ship safely to the port. Well, William Tell did that, but of course, just as they were arriving on the port, since he was no longer bound and tied, William Tell dove overboard and escaped. He then somehow found another crossbow. Again, the story is not clear on this. Tracked down the bailiff Gessler and shot him with his crossbow and killed him. That's the basic story of William Tell. Now, why is he so popular with the Swiss, and why did they honor him with his stamps? Well, that was said to be the beginning of a rebellion against Austria. It led to the formation of the Swiss Confederation. William Tell is said to have fought in battles against Austria, including the 1315 Battle of Morgarten. William Tell was said to have died in 1354 by trying to rescue a drowning child from a river in Uri, Switzerland. Now, these are stories about William Tell, but are they true? Is this fact or is this fiction? Well, the stories that started to appear in about the year 1470. And again, the incident was supposedly to have taken place in 1307. So there was a gap of almost 200 years between the actual event and the story. One of the first chronicles that described this event is called the White Book of Sarnen, and was a legend that most people took of this incident. A few years later, there was a number of ballads where the songster would sing the praises of William Tell, the incident, and the beginnings of the Swiss Confederation. Centuries later, William Tell is also mentioned in a standard history book written in 1734 that describes the event. But there is no actual record of a person by the name of William Tell and his son Walter ever existing. Of course, there is no evidence to the contrary either. And since then, of course, there's been everything from dramas, one written by the well-known German poet Friedrich von Schiller that was performed in 1804. There's also, of course, the Rossini opera, William Tell. You might have caught that music at the beginning of this video. And of course, Switzerland has honored William Tell and his son Walter with many postage stamps. So, William Tell, fact or fiction? We're not sure. But that's the story. I wonder how many of you knew that story or just thought it was the tale simply of a marksman trying to demonstrate his prowess with his crossbow. Let's take a look now at the stamps honoring William Tell. Beginning in 1907, Switzerland introduced a number of stamps honoring William Tell and his son Walter. Let's first take a look at the stamps of Walter Tell. Well, there's a number of variations of these stamps, and collectors can look in various catalogs or online and find information about all the different variations. Some of the basics here, though, will show with these stamps. So in this first group of 3 stamps here, you can see a young boy holding up a crossbow that's taller than he is. And also in his other hand, he has an apple with an arrow through it. And this is Walter, William Tell's son, who was part of that famous incident. Now, there's some variations on this particular one. If you notice on these first 3 stamps, he is standing just above the bottom of the stamp. There's another set of stamps that were released a little bit later that have him standing on sort of a platform instead. So the stamps were modified slightly. Collectors will try and search out both variations of the Walter Tell stamp to add to their collection. Also, to get into even more detail, from 1909 to 1911, the stamps were modified a little bit, and Walter is shown still holding the crossbow, standing on the platform. But if you look closely at the photo here, In the first one on the left, the string of the crossbow is in front of the frame of the crossbow. On the other ones, the string of the crossbow is behind the main frame of the crossbow. And in the third one, all the way to the right, the crossbow cord is behind the stock, but also the letters have more of a pronounced serif for the font, especially noticeable at the bottom of the stamp. Also, the loop at the top of the crossbow on that Type 3 stamp, the one on the right, is a little bit thicker than the previous stamps. So the catalogs will list all of these variations as well as all of the color variations of the stamps. And they were issued in various colors between 1918 and 1930. Those also have the second crossbow type with the cord of the crossbow behind the frame of the crossbow, and also some differences with the fonts a little bit and things like this. All the different colors are listed in the catalogs and can be easily found. Now, some of the stamps also had some grilled gum on the back, and this was beginning in 1930. A light grilling process was applied along with the gumming to prevent the stamps from curling. As shown in the photo above, the grilling resembles a faint grill of vertical and horizontal ribs covering the entire back of the stamp. This effect can usually be seen even after the gum has been removed, and so many people look at collecting that as part of something they really want to seek out and find and add to their collection. Also, here's a photo of a booklet of stamps, or a block of stamps rather, from my collection that have both the Walter stamps, sometimes called the Tell Boy stamps, along with a bust of William Tell. And if you notice that in this block, some of these stamps are upside down. Well, this is known as Tate Besh, and Tate Besh is simply a format for stamps in a sheet or in a block where some of the stamps are inverted or upside down. This could be contrasted with what most collectors are familiar with as a, say, tenant pair. But the Tate Besh pair has some of the stamps inverted or upside down. Now, this could be due to an accident during printing, or it could have been intentional. My research, looking up a lot of things, it's assumed that this was intentional for these stamps that show both William Tell and his son Walter. Well, also as time went on, there was revaluations added to many of the Walter stamps, and you can see some overprints on some of the stamps. Those are also highly collectible. There were some surcharges on some. A lot of those stamps and even the Tate Besh pairs or blocks are still very common, and you could usually find those through various stamp dealers. The William Tell depiction on stamps, sometimes called the William Tell chest image, is sort of a bust of William Tell. And there are many different color variations as well of these stamps. They're all very collectible. Between 1914 and 1934, there were some 17 different colored stamps of these William Tell bust variations. Also, in some of the stamps, there are some little differences. I'll put another photo up on the screen here, and this is in the 10-cent red denomination. There were actually two types. Type 1, the one on the left, the bust is 16.5 millimeters high, and the text was 15.5 millimeters wide, and the crossbar of the letter H in Helvetia was in the exact middle of the letter. Well, the one on the right, known as the Type 2, the bust has been shortened a bit. It's only 15 millimeters high, and the text is 15 millimeters wide, but the crossbar in the letter H is actually above the very middle of the letter instead. So it's recommended to find a good catalog and check these out, and you can find what the various colors were, which stamps had the grilled gum, and what the various varieties were for all of these stamps. So there's a lot of collectability in the William Tell stamps. There's also some more modern stamps that were shown by Switzerland over time. Some of these, of course, were a little bit later in time. For example, here's one from 1941 from Switzerland, and it shows a more modern depiction of William Tell. And so that's also very collectible. The one shown on the screen is the one shown from my collection. Also, there's some related stamps that don't show either William Tell or his son. For example, here's one that depicts Tell's Chapel. Well, this was the first of an annual series of Swiss stamps for a national festival beginning in 1938. And this depicts a chapel that was dedicated to William Tell. It was constructed at 1388 at the place on Lake Lucerne where William Tell is said to have escaped from Gessler's ship. Well, the oldest documents mentioning a chapel there date back to 1516, and Tell's Chapel has become a place of pilgrimage from the 16th century onward. The current chapel shown on the stamp above was redone and constructed on the site in 1879. There are 4 frescoes inside the chapel showing scenes from the legend of William Tell. And that chapel has been depicted several times on Swiss stamps since 1938. Now, William Tell's legend has gone strong throughout history. The opening music is the William Tell Overture, of course, from Rossini. And although you might just have heard it in television shows like The Lone Ranger, this was part of an opera, and the opera was really celebrating the battles of Switzerland against Austria and them fighting for their independence and the right to form a federation of Swiss states. So William Tell, a story that many people may not have known as to why he did the famous shooting the apple from the top of his son's head. And stamps, there's a wide variety of quite collectible stamps on William Tell that could make a wonderful topical collection. Also, the stamps that depict the crossbow on both the Walter stamps and the William Tell stamps, some people will collect that if they have a topical collection on weapons or bows and arrows or archery or things like that. So, fascinating story. I really love these stamps. I'm still looking to collect all the different variations of these to add to my collection. I think it's a wonderful chance to explore a little bit of history also and try and decide for yourself whether William Tell, if this was a true story or if it's just fiction. Let me know in your comments if you have an opinion one way or the other on this, or if you collect any of these William Tell stamps. So if you like this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for the next video. Not sure what the subject will be, but thanks for watching and happy collecting.